Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Tina Horvath. I serve as the Senior Director of Housing and Residence Life here at the University of Florida, and I'll have my co-presenters introduce themselves.
Good morning. So good to see so many familiar faces. I'm Michele Westrick from VMDO Architects, and I co-lead the higher ed studio with a focus on residence life.
Hi, everyone. Alex Jack from VMDO Architects, architect for this project and work in the higher ed studio as well.
Great. Well, thank you for choosing to spend a little virtual time with us this morning. We're excited to talk to you about what's been happening at the University of Florida and really how residence hall and design can really be on the forefront of campus transformation. When we look at, we'll go to the first slide. At the University of Florida, we've been going through a tremendous strategic effort over the last few years. And so really figuring out how to create a place of in-depth, rigorous engagement academically, but also that opportunity to provide social engagement for students. And so one of the things that has been driving the university in the strategic effort is this, what we call a drive to 5. And so when you look at this picture on the screen, in the center is the governor of Florida, DeSantis. To the right of him is our president, Fox. To the left is our chair of our board of trustees. So this drive to 5 is something the university has been undertaking for several years. And it's a goal that within the rankings for US News and World Report, that we would rise in the rankings with the ultimate goal of being in the top 5. And so this picture was from a year ago and reflective of when the rankings came out and we were 7, and this last year again in 6. And so I bring this up as it's a driver at the institution and also for housing and what we do, and it's critical for housing and staff to know where the university wants to go and how we see ourselves in that process. While rankings like this aren't necessarily how housing programs often describe ourselves, but thinking in terms of what would a top 5 housing program look like, and how do we maneuver and change the way that we approach and transform the campus to align with what the university is looking at. In addition to this, the university has also been going under multiple strategic efforts, as I mentioned. And so the UF Strategic Development Plan, it started in 2017. And you see on here the four areas of focus for that. And so the first one is a new American city. And that really, if you've not been to Gainesville before, really traditional college town, just under 200,000 people or so. We're in North Central Florida, about 2 hours from any major city, outside of Gainesville, rural areas, right? So that the city of Gainesville, it's critical, right? Employer in this region, right? And so recognize our responsibility to have a really strong partnership with the community. And so that new American city really hinges on that future of the surrounding community and how do we joint partner and plan with the city in moving forward. Proximity, it's really exactly what that sounds of is, right? How do we collaborate and innovate and encourage development within specific proximity of campus and resources within the Gainesville community? That strong neighborhood, right? How do we collectively with the community preserve historic neighborhoods and create a diverse housing stock? And then finally, the stewardship piece of that is, right, that outdoor space. Really in Florida and the Southeast, but in Florida in particular, right, our outdoor space is often our greatest attraction. And UF is a land grant mission institution. So how do we utilize and steward that outdoor space that we have? After that, we move into the UF strategic master plan. And so you'll see on the screen what that entails. What I'd really want to draw your attention to is that number where it says there's the 5 bullets, and one of them says the student experience. So within this, if we peel back the UF strategic master plan, there's a specific goal within the master plan that talks about housing, and specifically it says a campus with updated facilities, contemporary residence halls, and high quality technology infrastructure. And then speaking to the student experience, the plan outlines that student success is determined not only by what happens inside the classroom, but by the totality of their experience. Residential life and student services are therefore critical components of a preeminent university. I know for me, as a lead in housing, those are the words that I want to hear and see, right? We already know that research tells us that students are more successful having lived on campus, but to see and know that our university senior leadership recognizes that and considers what we do a valuable part of the university community, and we contribute to that preeminence and those goals within the state, but also in that strive to 5. That's critical for us. So we're excited to see that and partner. I should also mention there's a variety of other strategic planning that was happening. Housing embarked on a housing master plan after this. There's also a landscape master plan happening, a dining master plan happening, a parking master plan. So it really was an exciting time and for energies to get together and talk about what we were doing. And that doesn't happen often, that they're all happening at the same time. So it became important that we all also talked about our plans, right? And how they scaffolded together and supported one another, but yet maintained what we needed to do as individuals as well. So the University of Florida Master Plan began. And so we partnered with VMDO and Brailsford and Dunleavy to do our housing master plan. And we did a full master planning process that you would anticipate, right? Where we surveyed all of our students on campus. We did a facility analysis. We did a demand study, a market study, etc., to begin our process. This was the first time UF, while we had internally done strategic planning, we hadn't done a full master plan where we had partnered with outside individuals to come in and assist us. So it's important just to show you, give you a glimpse of our campus. And so when you're looking at this slide, we needed to figure out areas that we needed to focus in our master plan. And so we have just about 8,000 beds, undergraduate beds, and another almost 2,000 when we look at graduate and family. But in particular, what you're looking at is areas that we needed to focus. We knew that we couldn't do it all, right? This really has to be a slow and transformational process. And so we have buildings on campus that range from over 100 years old to the newest happening within the last 10 years. But when you're looking at this, those red facilities, that's the bulk of our stock. And those are mid-century buildings, right? Traditional community bathrooms, double-loaded corridors. And the average age of those facilities are 62 years. So some pretty dated facilities that we're working with. We had to really own where we're at. What you're seeing in front of you isn't necessarily what I would call preeminent, but it's the reality, and probably a reality that many of us face in terms of our mid-century and historic and the existing conditions, right? We have lounge and community spaces that are small and cramped and don't necessarily meet the needs. We have window or air shaker units, as we refer to them here, in many of our halls, right? Original MEP in many of our buildings. So really doing that full facility assessment that I referenced earlier to start to understand and get a handle on what we had in our buildings, and to start beginning that planning process. Move ahead. Also another effort that was happening is this campus framework plan. So again, multiple strategic efforts happening, and it took a lot of effort to make sure that we were communicating and our plans were aligning. I bring this slide up in particular where you see the red boxes that are outlined. So that became a really intentional part of conversation surrounding neighborhoods, and also that's the core, the academic core, and how do we as housing fall into the academic core? We have some buildings that are located within it, but as we would consider building and expanding and renovating, and that proximity for students and that core of campus, what kind of neighborhoods would we begin to establish around that core of campus? Okay. Again, wanted to show you what the collective piece looked like. And so we had to make this plan over time. And so if we really looked over this next 10 years, what did we hope to do? We knew that new construction would be part of it, but we have a responsibility to continue to upgrade and capital invest in our current facilities. So with the goal of hoping that by 2029, I will give the caveat, right, this was pre-COVID planning, but with the goal of 2029, this is where we wanted to be. We wanted to be able to renovate some of our spaces, and then what would come before 2029, and then also after 2029, what would be the hopes, if that's the blue, of new construction, and then acknowledging that some buildings, after we really looked at the assessment of our facilities, were at a point that they needed to be demolished. They'd really had wonderful lives and had many great students that would walk through the doors, but it's time to move past those facilities. So identifying some facilities that we would demolish in the process as well. The goal wasn't really to net gain a tremendous amount of buildings. We do not have a live-on requirement at the University of Florida, and have been fortunate that have a long history of filling our spaces. When you look at another view of our campus, when we identified where we would potentially place new facilities, but we oftentimes refer to campus like many in directional, a west neighborhood concept and an east neighborhood concept. This west neighborhood was a conversation about what kind of building would be in this, a potential partnership with athletics. In that space, it was really located close to many of our athletic facilities, and the east neighborhood, which fit really nicely within that earlier red box that you saw. And these were the areas that we decided to focus on and develop neighborhood concepts. So what you're looking at here, this is an initial rendering of what a building could potentially look like on that west campus side of things, with a partnership with dining. And then the next slide will show you what we were talking at that time about, potentially what we needed on the east side of campus. You know, as we were doing our master plan, it became part to have some visual renderings, right? To be able to share along the way with our board of trustees what we were thinking and where we were going, so we could get some excitement built around the ideas of housing and how it could impact campus.
Great. Thank you, Tina.
Mm-hmm.
I'll walk you through some of that excitement that happened after that renderings. What all the master planning work that Tina mentioned, us as architects, we took in and benefited from. So the University of Florida's Honors Residential College, the vibrant campus experience, meaningful living and learning opportunities, taking action towards equity, maintaining affordability. Initially, we started by being handed a landscape master plan. I'll show you how the building responded to this. It was very important for us to know the connective network through the campus and be able to respond to it for our buildings. Not only just to place, find out where the available land is for our project, but just to continue the strikes through the campus of where heavy pedestrian traffic is, where people will congregate, how they'll move in the future. So here we can see where we're at on the campus. It's on the corner of 13th and Museum Road. This is the Broward community. It's the mid-century buildings that Tina was mentioning earlier. In the white buildings here is our project. We're between mid-century modern and then kind of new towards the future, that's lining 13th Street, with buildings that are the data science, other buildings that are metal panel and more forward looking. Here's our site as it looks today, not for too much longer, but just a port that was an important part on the campus. This is the gateway that a lot of people will be encountering as they drive through the campus, one of the first projects that they will encounter. So we paid careful attention to the scale, the size, the mass. So the master plan basically told us that we have to maintain this core campus passage, this bold connective network that you see in the orange there. And then, you know, we're building 4 buildings around here, and students are also living here. So we have this heavy pedestrian trafficked area, and then we also have the Landscape Center, which is a semi-private place for the students. The ground floor of the entire building is all active learning, and we'll see more about that later in the presentation. But creating 2 different distinct avenues through here to balance the student experience. After that, looking at creating 4 different distinct zones for the exterior experience. So carving out a large great lawn, continuing the plaza that's lined with cafe and external programs. There's a park, Ely Park, that we're preserving for all the ecological and old growth trees that are there. And then, like I was mentioning, the courtyard is this semi-private place for students to gather and feel the, you know, the home experience. So the building identity, the connection, and the pride of place are drivers for this. This would be one of the buildings that we see upon entering the 13th Street. So one of the first experiences CUF. So the building is iconic, but it's blended in with some of the natural materials of the project. So using brick, introducing some of the precast and colors. It distinguishes itself aesthetically, but does fit into the surrounding context and the forward look. This is a view of the bowl connected network. So it'll be a large crossing, and then students from all across campus, visitors will be on this side. In addition to that, this is just going up, but to show you the more quiet and contemplative part. This is looking at the courtyard view from the same street. So we've brought down the scale, brought the buildings a little bit closer. And we've also experienced or used the UF brick across the whole ground level. That's something that grounds the building and stitches it in with the fabric of the student experience traveling through the project. So just moving right into the courtyard, large sunken courtyard bracketed by those buildings, glass. So the active learning program is transparent, and there's a visual in and out of all these spaces. So this will be the place where students can hang out. They can sit on the walls. There's low canopy of trees for sun shading, comfortable. Not only that, but at night active. So screen, keeping it open, flexible. And then looking off to the right is the learning commons, the living room of the space, the place where everybody can get together and congregate in the center. We're looking at in the bold, transparent commons area that will house a cafe. That's a place that is designed to be moved in and out freely with the public or people visiting for counseling. This is part of that expansive plaza that cuts through here. So we're keeping the scale of the project low by introducing lots of canopies. This is, after all, just a housing space for students. So we need to maintain that familiar small scale, but also balance it with this very vibrant plaza throughout. And a couple more shots. This one's looking at the center, the commons, the Gator Village. As we're backing up, we know the campus loves hammocks, so introducing a little bit of folly fun into a place that's right in the middle, could be daylit or lit at night. And then coming back, this is a look at that great lawn that we're restoring to the historical topography, but a place that's unscripted, place for our students to throw frisbee, hang out. And this is lining just the Ely Preserve, the Ely Park area, maintaining all that old growth, as I was mentioning, but also creating small pedestrian pathways for serene walks, for hanging out in the park here. being good neighbors. And here we are looking back. This would be from 13th, the corner. So our building is just behind that, the preserve there and the trees, and it just nestles in.
Great, thanks, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
And so to talk about the integrated living and learning community, on the next slide, just remembering back to Tina's explanation of the framework plan that was developed, there were 5 themes really that came out of that plan, having to deal with physical environment, academics, and the student experience, as she had pointed out. On the next slide, they talk a lot about the residential life experience, as she noted, but really this idea of how to have a rigorous program and taking living learning communities to the next level, and providing space for students to really live, play, and study fluidly together, all arranged around this idea of having opportunities for collaboration. So on the next slide, you'll see that we pulled together a faculty focus group and asked how we could really enhance the living learning communities that were already on campus, or how would they be reimagined moving forward. And by and far, what all of the faculty members had identified was that they wanted opportunities for cross-collaboration. They themselves felt very siloed and felt like the living learning communities were a really great opportunity to be problem solving, being oriented to solving really complex problems that would require students from a variety of different disciplines. And so not only would the students have an opportunity to work together, but it would be a really great opportunity for the faculty to come together as well around these conversations. And on the next slide, we talked about during the housing master plan, we really investigated how we could push a variety of student services into the residence halls and embed and provide the convenience of having opportunities for programming, health and wellness opportunities, advising, and simply just having access to faculty and also to the housing and residence education staff in that proximity of the neighborhood itself. So we'll talk about what that looks like in the Honors College in just a moment. But on the next slide, you'll see a diagram of the buildings. And of course, at the foundation is how do we build community? And this has been a core focus of residence life since the beginning of time, really. But the color coding that you're seeing here is an idea about the RA community that is a 40-person community, but how can we stitch those communities together to form houses? And that was more aligned with the Honors College programming, where we could have 80 or 120 students that were really collaborating together to create a house model. So on the next slide, you'll see, but in order to do that, we really needed some intentional planning of social space and open and flexible space that you're seeing in the yellow boxes that are located strategically. They're open lounges, they have open stairwells so that there's direct access between those communities to form a house. And then the next slide. Within the houses then that form each of the 4 buildings, we started to create an identity for those 4 buildings. And so not only did that start to develop a color palette and material palette, but there was an academic focus for each of those 4 buildings. And so we really tried to enhance and celebrate those unique experiences so that there would be more of a sense of connection and community within the building. So on the next slide, looking then at the ground floor level, we're really blending what we would call our best practices, shown in the yellow areas. Those are the spaces you're all very familiar with that are social lounges, rec lounges, learning commons, and spaces of that nature that really celebrate a less formal opportunity for social interaction and programming. But the blue areas represented a much more intentional, rigorous academic focus. And so on the next slide, calling out what each of the buildings had to offer, we had an ensemble room and focus on music in that building, maker space, a studio space, as well as mindfulness studio and reading room. And so just walking quickly through those spaces, you'll see on the next slide, this is an image that we've created of the reading room. So spacious, open, you know, the furniture allows for large group study, or there are other individual spaces off to the edges as well that allow for more quiet, focused reading as well. In the next image, makerspace. Of course, everybody is interested in tinkering and 3D printers. And but what was interesting, we did a focus group with the students. They were very much interested in crafting as well. And so you'll see opportunities. There's sewing machines along the edges. And so this was really a more blended idea about makerspace and not just being focused on 3D printers and more technology driven applications, but it was really a broader range. And on the next slide, a gaming room, a gaming lounge that not only offered social opportunity, but again, gaming meaning that it could be board games, puzzles, things of that nature, providing the furniture that would be conducive to those opportunities, but also providing space for virtual reality. And so you'll see a VR station in the back corner there. So this has a variety of different programming that could occur here. The art studio, really encouraging exploration in a variety of different arts, and also connecting an exhibit space immediately adjacent to that, so that the students really have an opportunity to express themselves and perhaps even have you know, informal showings of their work within the exhibit space adjacent. And a mindfulness and fitness studio, obviously needed more now than ever, but just a larger, open, flexible space that has a serene sort of feeling to it, with the opportunity to really spill out onto an outdoor terrace. And so we're imagining this could be utilized for yoga classes, or it might also have small group counseling sessions, but it's really a great opportunity to provide a variety of different functions. And all of those really then circle around that central building of the Commons, where all of the students, the residents, and also non-residents of this whole neighborhood have an opportunity to come together. And so on the next slide, you'll see that really comes to life in the Great Hall, which is a large space, very transparent, looks out over the courtyard space that Alex was presenting earlier, but providing that kind of flexibility, flexible furniture. In another image, you'll see on the next slide, it's really just an opportunity to have students come and gather in a variety of different ways, including, you'll see on the next slide, that we're accounting for large lectures as well. And so the Honors College could host a variety of different speaker series here, and all of the AV and equipment is designed for that application. So we were talking about during the Housing Master Plan, we had looked for opportunities to embed the student services into the residence halls. And so at the Honors College, we really started focusing in on space that could accommodate student affairs programming, really of any sort. And so on the next slide, you would see that the yellow spaces that I had talked about being social lounges, learning commons could really also act as opportunities for student affairs touch points to come in, utilize those spaces, and the way in which we've designed them have adjacent breakout rooms. So if there are opportunities for advising or tutoring, that this area is really designed in order to accommodate any of that type of temporary programming that may push into the residence hall. And the red dots are really just suggestions for hot desk opportunities for a very quick touch for a variety of things that could really come into the residence halls and reach the students where they really are. And we're finding more success of students using those services if they're really very convenient. And then the larger red boxes are really just showing where the housing and residence education offices are, and the honors offices, which we feel are also equally as important to being very approximate to the living area for the students. So
part of this process too, right, we acknowledge we need to take action towards equity. When we did the master plan, we were intentional. We did a survey that went to every student at the University of Florida, and then also did several focus groups that we would associate happening in master plans. So we took time to make sure that we were getting some student voices. Then we also had an imperative that came from the presidents. The next slide. So the UF imperative from the President Fox, and just to give you the framework, so the president sent this email out to all staff in June, and really, acknowledging the atrocities and the visual resurgence of racial violence against Blacks that were happening, and that we all collectively need to work together as a UF community, and that, I have a collective responsibility, and our team does, to grow from this personally and professionally, and how we support students. So knowing this, right, and what were some of those actions that we're going to take, went forward into the next slide, decided that we needed to go back and do some additional intentional work with feedback, and thinking of not just this building, right, but as we showed earlier, the hope is to continue to transform the campus from the housing perspective, and what kind of inclusive design student listening sessions could we have that we really talked about how students interacted with these spaces, and how will we apply that broadly across all of our communities. And so knowing that while DEI work and social justice is important, we aren't the experts in it. So we partnered with our multicultural and diversity affairs, we call MCDA here, and met with them a few times over the summer to start talking about what would an inclusive design student listening session be? What were the things that we would really want to focus on? What do we want to get out of these sessions, right? To be super thoughtful and intentional about how we interacted, and that the MCDA staff would be leading these sessions, and they would be helping and recruiting students to come and interact with us. The next slide. So really, the goals for the student engagement session, they were two. We wanted to understand how the design of UF residence halls facilitates that sense of belonging and inclusions for all students, right? That we really want any student in any of our facilities, when they walk into the space, that there's a sense of belonging, that they are safe in these spaces. But also too, not just talk the talk. We wanted to, after the feedback, to really create and identify action that we as housing could do to implement and create really more inclusive environments in our residence halls. Next slide. So the framework that we came up with out of this equitable design is that we really wanted, we wanted the design to be welcoming and appealing to all users, right? Michele had mentioned that some of these spaces too would able for all students and student affairs to have some space in this. So any student, whether they're housing or not, coming into these spaces, that they're appealing to all users. That we ensure an equal opportunity of the use of space. We avoid segregating and stigmatizing any users, and provide provisions for privacy, security, and safety to all of our users. Next slide. So how this starts to break out in we had focus groups, and again, we did just like this since it's been in the midst of the pandemic. And so we showed students, we came together twice and showed them a variety of images that we had, and see how they would resonate and what responses they would have, again, to this, welcoming to all users, our common spaces, the kitchen concepts that we were thinking about, what does accessibility look like, study spaces, specialty spaces, a tremendous time we talked about bathrooms, outdoor spaces, and even environmental graphics that we could bring. And how do all of these areas support up through these framework pieces that welcoming to all users, ensuring equal opportunity, avoiding segregating or stigmatizing, and privacy and security. How does all of that, these spaces play into that? Next slide. So what we learned, so welcoming to all students. Students really talked about using warm, natural materials in spaces, created this sense. Wood tones specifically were mentioned repeatedly. These were images that we showed them that really resonated, right? Integrative, playful, vibrant colors, the opportunity, right? Maintain wheelchair accessibility throughout, which allows for movement for all sorts of students, what that circulation and flow feels like. Flexible furniture, really spent a lot of time talking about furniture and how students interact and what they need from furniture in spaces to support small group settings, large group settings, individual needs. The seating types too, obviously students have privacy when they're in the rooms, but a lot of housing spaces are public social spaces. And so really for all students, thinking through those lenses of those students that we talked about, what does that look like, right? From the minute they enter in a space, right? How do they identify? Is there a place that they would feel comfortable sitting in a room, that they would fit within a chair, right? That it would meet their needs. How many students were exiting spaces before we could even get in there, get them in the door because of what we had in the space. So really being mindful in those conversations and just listening. We did very little talking in the sessions and let students really come to us and talk about, and that privacy and security, right? Critically important. And so what kind of privacy do you need when you're in some of these social spaces to be able to feel comfortable, right? And not scrutinized, and do a diversity of activities. Next slide. Bathrooms, as I mentioned, we talked quite a bit about bathrooms, and these are examples of public bathrooms that we would talk about, really from a small scale public bathroom into a large scale. And again, that they're welcoming to all users, provide options that are open and accessible, right? If you'll notice, right, this sort of nondescript entrances, right, where any student could come in and then enter the space that they need to enter. That was an important piece of it, right? That we provide multiple gender inclusive options. And you'll see on the scale, on the models, there's, all gender, there's men's and women. And that, again, that they're convenient, right? That they're not stigmatizing, that there's this nondescript access, privacy for others in those spaces, right? There isn't, bathrooms are private. What happens in those spaces are private. And so how do we make sure in those spaces that students can have that private experience that they need, right? The type of doors that are used and the partitions that are used throughout the space as well. Next slide. So we also asked the students to share with us places on campus that they currently felt were welcoming and inclusive. And these are pictures from UF campus that the students shared with us that they think makes them feel comfortable, and things that really resonated were, right, pride flags where they were seeing less restrictive seating, multiple seating options, right? How the union is that space where anybody can come in and out and go. Naming of facilities, right? How do we, and in the president's email, the full version of it, he talks about the need to rename some of our facilities, right? And so naming, moving towards broader group names, not just donation based. Really, how do we honor Indigenous land where our facilities are built? And so how do we reconcile that history? Unwelcoming and non-inclusive spaces really were those lack of gender neutral facilities, single-use gyms related facilities, and naming again, and who is celebrated in that name or not celebrated. Next. This is how that breaks down, just really looking at it again. Again, it's those spaces, the inclusive spaces, power outlets that were ready, chairs with backs, lower cabinets, safety of crosswalks outside the building, and then those less inclusive spaces. We talked about what we had in housing, right? That not big enough countertops or single stoves or sinks, the fluorescent lighting and how it impacted students and abilities, and the different limiting sizes in bathrooms. Okay. And again, so the equitable design guidelines really is what we use, and so it's how we made it appealing for all users. Really became important, and the diversity of student voice and interest in the design process. I'm really proud of the work that our team put in to go back and intentionally make sure that we can apply these future as we continue to transform housing. Next slide. Maximizing affordability. Of course, this becomes a priority for all of us, and especially coming out of this next year. And leading up, you can go to the next slide, Alex. Leading up to this, you want to own that really had been through kind of 3 years of really intentionally diving into the budget at the University of Florida, really looking at our expenses, changing the modeling of how we were expending money, and really honestly significantly cutting back, reprioritizing positions and what we needed, etc. So to get us set up to be able to move forward. SUS, that's a state university system. I'm sure all of you similarly, the price points within the state become important, and the board talks about where we fall within the state. And really for this building, it's that double occupancy rate that we're really looking at. And for UF, we haven't had a rental rate increase since 2015, and we're really at the bottom, right, in that space, which puts us in a good place leverage-wise to have some movement, for rental rates, which comes with a new building. Next slide. And we needed to talk about that implementation strategy. We did this as part of the master plan, right? We knew that we were going to need a system-wide financial scenarios and what that potentially looked like. Ultimately, of these 3 rate increases that you see here, where we landed at the end was 4.5, that we wanted to do a shorter duration of higher rental rates over a 5-year and still be within the debt coverage ratio. I'm happy to say that we presented, submitted the information for December to our board of trustees, and we presented it as a package of 4.5 years, up for 4.5% up to 5 years, with the caveat that each year we'd come back and give an update of where we're at, and they approved the 4.5% for up to 5 years in December. So it was a good step forward.
Great, thanks. I realize that we are running out of time, so I'm going to breeze through the delivery method and would be happy to take any questions from folks, but I do want to leave a little bit of time at the end to hear from you all. We did deliver this project under a design build delivery method. And so essentially the way that differs from a traditional design bid build is that we're doing the design drawings up front really to establish the architectural expression of the building and get buy-in from university stakeholders about the building appearance and organization, as we've sort of shown you how all of those spaces are designed to interact with one another. And the design build team then will take it over the project and put together a cost estimate based on that criteria that we've put together both in drawings and a narrative to describe the scope of the work. And therefore at that point we'll have a very solid view of what the cost expectation is for the project. So on the next slide, we did investigate multiple mechanical structural envelope systems and ranked them, put that into the criteria documents as well, did a cost analysis, and have asked that the design build teams are welcome to explore other alternatives as well, but they would have to make sure and ensure that their proposal meets the budget requirements, meets the documents, and also the sustainability goals that the university has set forward. So next slide. And this is what that looks like. Essentially, we call it the red light, green light, where we've identified all of those systems explorations that we've already done and things that we've discussed with the university that they've made decisions about that they really don't want to talk about any further or identify as red light items, and then green light items where they're open to hearing the creativity that the design build teams would bring forward. And the next slide is really just a review in the next image of how we were doing continual VE in order to make sure that we didn't lose the integrity of the design in the building. So the next couple of slides really just show an evaluation of not just simply cutting square footage out of the building, but really thinking critically of where the biggest cost savings measures could be, and with some creative reassembling of certain spaces, we didn't lose beds or the design integrity of the project. So with that, I'm only leaving a few minutes, but would really love to hear from you all and hear what questions are on your mind.
Hi,
Saw in the chat the love for the hammock.
Yeah,
It's great.
not necessarily a question, just wanted to give you all kudos for incorporating creative spaces. I think it's just wonderful to see not only the maker space, but the opportunity for students' work to be displayed and just to kind of capture the creativity that's on so many campuses. So good job on that.
Thank you.
Tina, there is a question in the chat box. Yeah. Approach to selection for the various housing assignments.
I assume so. I can talk about our housing assignment process. And so we have students, we don't have designated areas for students to live. And what I mean by that is a first year student can come in and select any sort of space to live on campus. They can select to live in a traditional hall, they can, which is good because that's the majority of what we have. And they can select to live in apartments. Now we do offer a variety of living learning communities. We have an honors college, which will be housed in this piece. So they have opportunities to select in or participate depending for the honors college. There's a different selection process for getting into the honors college. So generally speaking, students can have a lot of options when they come in. It's really, we go by a choice model here. It's a choice to live on campus. You have a choice to pick your space that you want to have. You have a choice whether you have a dining meal plan or not. Hopefully that answers it.
Thank you. Great. Well, I realize it's 11 o'clock and want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to take a break before their next session. But please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. I know that on the SEAHO website, there's an opportunity to reach out. Both Francis and I are, you may know my colleague, Francis Langowski. Francis and I are listed there as direct contacts. If you have any questions, we can help you with.
Yeah, happy to connect at any time for sure. There's a lot of details. If you want to know, we'll share.